Hi there, this is John here, and I'm responding to the latest, I think it's the latest video from Mr. Evidence. I've forgotten your name, sorry about that. And I think the last bit of the video is fascinating about the embodied mind. But before I get to that, I just want to perhaps have a sideways glance at it. Now, the argument, as I understand it, you put forward two lots of arguments. The first one was that I exist, that my senses sometimes give me accurate information, that we have evidence-based beliefs, that the strength of the evidence indicates the strength of the belief or supports the belief, and evidence-based beliefs can be re-examined to validate them or not. And then later on you go a bit further and you say all evidence, all beliefs are justified by physical evidence. So this is a sideways look, a sideways critique, if you like. Now the first question that I'm going to put to you is to ask this question: what is evidence? Now, it's odd because in a way I agree with much of what you say. I agree with your critique of the rationalists. I agree with you that mathematics is not simply a sort of self-evident truth. I completely agree with you that mathematics goes back into physical evidence. But my critique is this, is that the chain of causation, there's a chain of causation, if you like, before we get to evidence. And so my first critique is that you don't go far back enough in the chain. Now, before we have evidence, this word evidence is a word that, if you like, it encompasses experiencing. Before you have any evidence, you have to have experiencing. Now, if you go back beyond experiencing in the chain, I would suggest that it goes back to I'm aware of my experiencing, therefore I am. Now, I'd agree with you that I am aware, therefore I am, contains an explicit assumption that I exist. So I would say that I'm aware, therefore I am. And in particular, I can be aware of my experiencing. I can be aware of my thoughts and thinking processes. I can be aware of experiencing as in the five senses that give me information about the world in which I live. And my experiencing is also can be internal. It can be physiological in the sense that I can be aware of my heart beating. I can be aware of the different sensations, the pre-articulate sensations. And when I specifically bring awareness into my body, and I become acutely aware of this, also quite frequently as a practice it takes me into what feels like another dimension. So my first critique is this, that physical evidence is really a way of constructing, it's a way of constructing our experiencing. Basically, it's a conceptual idea that is rooted and grounded in our experiencing. And in particular, it is a type of experiencing associated with the world which a priori we take to live in. So my critique of your statement that evidence of beliefs is always justified by physical evidence, I would actually want to say, well, no, the evidence of beliefs is justified by experiencing, and physical evidence is simply a way of conceptualizing our experiencing of the outside world. But what you're doing is you are completely missing out the inner dimension of the experiential process. So that's at the heart of my critique. That experiencing has an outer and an inner dimension. And just to give some extra information around this, I'm going to very briefly talk about how babies develop language and develop conceptual meaning. Now, the first thing about babies is that they are experiencing. They are experiencing beings. And in particular, for example, there's a whole realm of emotions and feelings which are part of experiencing and which are pre-conceptual. Emotions and experiencing are linked, in fact, to the physiology, and they're linked to felt needs. Let me give you a practical example of that, and I'll explain later on why I think it's significant. A baby doesn't have access to conceptual meaning, but a baby feels hungry. When a baby feels hungry, not only does it have a physiological feeling of hunger, but in addition it feels distress. That distress is then expressed through crying, through sounds, through waving its hands about maybe. Now, if mother doesn't get the right felt need, perhaps mother offers a hug rather than the breast. The hug may be nice, the felt need is not fulfilled, baby continues to cry, continues to rage even. Now later on, if mother offers breast or bottle, the felt need is actually fulfilled. The anger, which are to do with protecting the little life, begins to dissipate. And if there are no other felt needs, then what happens is that the baby then has a sense and a feeling of contentment. So there is, what you're talking about is beliefs justified by physical evidence. I'm saying that physical evidence is simply one aspect or a conceptualization of our basic experiential process, and that our experiential process has an outer and an inner dimension to it. Now, I want to then go on and talk about the relationship between experiencing and conceptualization. And in one of my previous videos, I gave a very simple illustrative point concerning this, and I'll make that point again, but I'll also elaborate on it and expand on it. I'm going to put my hand up here. Let me try and get this right. You can see my hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is the conceptualization, and that is the experience. If a baby has been taught French, it'll probably do it better than me. We'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If we wanted to reverse some of the numbers, we could say 1, 2, 3, 5, 4. And as long as we all agreed, that would be fine. Now, there is definitely, that is a very simple illustration, but of course, how we conceptualize our experiencing can indeed, and this is at the heart of the argument, be both consistent with that experiencing, and it can be, and you can have two ways of conceptualizing experiencing. Both of them are consistent with the experiencing, and both of them can in fact be contradictory. And this is particularly true of, I think it's particularly true of what I call the inner dimensional aspect of experiencing. And let me give you an explanation as to what I mean. There is a whole wealth of experiencing, and remember, experiencing is at the heart of our belief in physical evidence. If we had no experiencing, then we would have no physical evidence. Okay, so there's a whole wealth of experiencing which comes under the big broad heading of spirituality. There's lots of different words for it. Now, at the moment, the word spirituality, I'm not assuming a metaphysical or a naturalistic explanation to explain that experiencing. I'm not making those assumptions, but I'm using it as a big broad heading to give an indication of the type of thing that I'm talking about. Now, if you take two authors, I'm a great fan of Brian Thorne and David Meehan's. Brian Thorne is a Christian, David Meehan's is an atheist. For those of you who are not familiar with their work, they've written some classic works on person-centered counselling. Now, under this heading of spirituality or spiritual experiencing, there seems to be a recognizable experiential basis. In other words, by assessing the language, by looking at the descriptions, we can of this phenomenon, we can sense that David Meehan's and Brian Thorne are both talking about a similarity of experiencing beneath the conceptual language. Now, Brian Thorne and David Meehan's use different ways of conceptualizing the experience. David Meehan's, for example, will use existential language such as relational depth. He will talk about a sense of interconnectedness. Now, that is the way in which he describes this particular experiential base. Brian Thorne, on the other hand, will talk about a sense of encountering the divine, encountering God. What you seem to have, is a common experiential base, which can in fact be conceptualized in different ways. Now, the next stage is to look at the way in which things are conceptualized and the beliefs and the propositions that are contained within that conceptualization process. So, for example, for David Meehan's, implicit within his way of conceptualizing it is that this experiential base does not indicate anything over and beyond the interaction with the situation within which the experience arises. So the experience, these spiritual type experiences, these experiences that he talks about, relational depth, are a product of him and his interaction with that situation, with the client, with the environment. So they spring from within him. Now, Brian Thorne, on the other hand, implicit are different beliefs. When he feels that it has that experience that David Meehan talks about in terms of connectedness, he implicit within his conceptualization of experiencing numinous, experiencing God, is indeed a belief that the universe is such that it is possible that you can experience something that is over and above yourself, such as God. And so there are difference of beliefs here. There is a belief, there is a common experiential base under this term spirituality. There are existential and theistic ways of describing that experience which relate to beliefs, and there are also contained within that conceptualization process a sense of propositions about the nature of the universe. If you explore David Meehan's way of conceptualizing it, there seems to be an implicit assumption of a materialistic philosophy. Now, I haven't checked this out with David Meehan's, but that seems to be implicit, that consciousness, if you like, is a byproduct of physical life, that there is no metaphysical dimension, that all things are naturalistically explained. Within the way of conceptualizing and the beliefs of Brian Thorne, from this same experiential base, is a belief that perhaps the universe is far more mysterious than some people would like to admit, and there is there is at least room in this universe for the possibility of an encounter of other. So what you have is you have a common experiential base. You have different ways of conceptualizing it, existential, theistic. And within that conceptualization are different beliefs. It seems that David Meehan's beliefs are quite materialistic. Brian Thorne, on the other hand, is open to the metaphysical. And contained within that is also a process of propositions about the universe. Now, those propositions in existential terms seem to be akin to materialism, whereas the propositions inherent within, say, Brian Thorne's way of conceptualizing it are more sort of metaphysical. Now, my argument here is that that you can have different conceptualizations that are perfectly and internally consistent, right? And they also make perfect sense of the evidence. The evidence, of course, is experiencing. And also in terms of falsification and verification, David Meehan's that the implicit beliefs in what David Meehan says can be falsified if they're not true, but they cannot be verified if they are. Brian Thorne's can be verified potentially, perhaps in the next life if there is such a thing, but not falsified. I'm now running out of time, but that's my response.